And so this week, I thought we could look at a second one of these attitudinal foundations of mindfulness, and that's patience. And there's a definition of patience, which John Kabat-Zinn, who offered this framework of the 7 or sometimes 8 attitudinal foundations of mindfulness. And his definition of patience is this: to be patient is simply to be completely open to each moment, accepting it in its fullness, knowing that, like the butterfly, things can only unfold in their own time. And he uses the image of the butterfly there, having already described how sometimes, and I think there's a famous example in literature where this happens, where a child tries to free the butterfly from its cocoon before the butterfly is actually ready to be freed. And of course, that doesn't turn out so well for the butterfly. But it's an interesting sort of image of how we can sometimes kind of rush to make something happen that we want to happen. Or conversely, well, not conversely, it's the same actually, but a sort of opposite kind of example of sometimes we want to get rid of something that is happening that we don't want to be happening. And so it's impatience that buys into this need to want things to be not how they are, when the reality, and actually the unavoidable reality, is that things are always as they are. So when we rush and we grasp and we push away experiences that are already present, then we are engaged in a futile fight with things as they are. And this is particularly true when situations are chronic, or we don't have the power to change them. Or maybe we just can't change them yet, or we can't influence them yet, or maybe our influence brought into the present moment is not going to lead to what we want immediately, if indeed ever. So gardening is another example of this that speaks to me, how we can't rush the seasons. There's an ancient phrase from Heraclitus, which is "Don't push the river." Actually, I'm mistaken in that. No, Heraclitus said you can't step in the same river twice, which is also true, by the way. You can't step in the same river twice, but he didn't say don't push the river. I can't remember where that one comes from, actually. But this sense of not needing to kind of be king canute, basically, and instead to listen to the waves. This is what we practice when we're meditating, is we're kind of experiencing the waves, and sometimes they can be tumultuous waves, really choppy stuff, and at other times it's smooth and peaceful. And if we can tune in to what's true rather than trying to always make it something else, then we are beginning to practice patience. Another definition of patience, when you actually look at the sort of derivation of the word, particularly the sort of the PAT part of it, is suffering. And so a quality of suffering with, which again may not sound very, very nice, and sometimes indeed it isn't very nice. But it also has a quality, I like the fact that there's this with here, because that has a quality of connecting, that actually we may be able to sit with, whether it's our own suffering, in which case we're sitting with ourselves and our experience, alongside ourselves, or whether we're sitting with someone else and their suffering. We're not trying to gloss over or push someone, including ourselves, into another experience that might be better. Maybe there's some sense of actually needing to be with where we are sometimes. So going with the nature of flow, I guess, going with the nature of flow. And actually, that this can be the most skillful way to respond to situations, because once we're aligned with the flow of things as they are, then we've got much more opportunity to influence. If we're pushing against the river, then all of our energy goes into that resistance. However, if we start to surf, then we can start to maybe, we can develop some surfing skills, and we can begin to maybe flow in various different directions along with circumstances. So there is some room to maneuver once we align, but until we've aligned, there isn't so much room for maneuver. So whilst it might seem somehow passive, it's a first condition for change to occur. Yeah, thank you for Tony. Yeah, don't push the river; it flows by itself, is a Chinese proverb. Yeah, so maybe it doesn't actually have an attribution. It's sort of in the realms of the proverbial, but proverbs tend to be proverbs because they've lasted the test of time. So in meditation practice, then, the way that we cultivate patience, and it is a skill that we can cultivate. It's not just a virtue that we either have or we don't have. We know that experience changes our minds and our brains and our capacity for abiding experience. So when we are willing to sit with what we're finding, when we're willing to come back from the wandering of the mind that's inevitable, and when we're willing to practice that with a sense of being patient with ourselves and being patient with all of those aspects of ourselves, particularly perhaps the parts of ourselves that we're not so fond of usually in the doing mode of mind, then we are practicing patience. And I mean, it's interesting that, in this time where there's been a sort of, a need to practice patience because things are not generally how we want them to be. The restrictions of the coronavirus lockdown, that many people have reported perhaps small but not insignificant delights arising in the midst of the challenges, such as noticing spring arriving, noticing the pleasure of time with others who we might usually, even though we might live with, we sort of rush past. Or maybe the pleasure of a connection like this, where we can actually touch in and, have the space and time to be with one another in this way. These kind of gatherings will probably not last forever. And even if they do, or even if they did last a long time, chances are that many of you would not want or be able to come because something else will need doing at 6 o'clock on a Tuesday and Thursday evening. Where might you have been on 6 o'clock on a Tuesday or Thursday evening before lockdown happened? And yet, here we all are. I wouldn't have been here, certainly. Just post my two sons' swimming lesson, probably getting them some dinner at that time after the swimming lesson. So I might be on the road or, just got home. And yet, something about this sort of enforced invitation to be patient, that's not a total oxymoron, enforced invitation. Something about that has enabled creativity and enabled something new to be seen and happen. So maybe there's, even though patience is often seen to be a virtue, something we have to kind of, it's a good thing and we've got to do it. I don't really want to, but okay. Maybe actually there are some real benefits that can come from it in the moment and then over the long term in our lives as well, if we can actually let go of some of the impulses to behave in ways that are not helpful for us and others around us. So moving from impatience to patience. It's lifelong work, of course. So we do that moment by moment.